All right, guys. So we are in lesson 4 on unit 7. We're still talking about food processing. Remember, just because food is processed does not mean that it's bad. There's processing and then ultra processing. And food processing and preserving has been around from our early ancestors. They had to figure out a way to make food last longer, especially in the winter. So they came up with some things that we still use today, and we've even expanded on that. So, the main reason they did this was to reduce the risk of spoiling. Just make sure you know right here's a vocab word. Spoiling makes food inedible because of taste, texture, safety, or a combination of the three. The things that lead to spoilage are microorganisms such as yeast, mold, and bacteria. You may see that whenever mold is growing on bread or fruit, or if something you have some weird coloring on a meat, it's turning gray, that's microorganisms at work. Intrinsic enzymes, temperature, moisture, and insects and vermin, just like varmints. So food does better in a cool, dry environment, such as refrigerators. It's going to spoil more slowly than warm and moist. That's why we rely on refrigeration. Back, our ancestors did not have refrigeration. That's why a lot of them had cellars, where they would go in and it would be under the ground, so it would keep food cool. My great grandma used to keep potatoes and onions and things under her house because it was cooler under there. So they all had all kinds of tricks. But refrigeration makes it a lot easier. So, some traditional forms of food preservation: fermenting. Fermenting is when you add yeast culture to a liquid or mixture of solids and liquids. Most people are going to associate this with beer and wine. Okay, it's also done with vegetables. Sauerkraut is just fermented cabbage, and yogurt is fermented. Um, so they think that fermentation was found out accidentally, and that's just like most discoveries. Okay, smoking, that's another form, using low heat and wood smoke to preserve food. So it's smoked and dried out, so like jerky and things like that. It keeps for a long time and safe to eat. And so it's really great whenever the climate doesn't allow food to be dried easily. Really, it's uncommon now, but some types of ham, fish, and sausage are still eaten after traditional smoking. So I'm not talking about like smoking a brisket. I'm talking about smoking to preserve, like smoked salmon. All right, drying. So like using a dehydrator, and this would be the jerky, like dried apricots, dried fruits, those sorts of things that we still see. Raisins. Pickling. That's using vinegar to preserve foods, like putting vinegar in cucumbers and making pickles. You can just make pickled okra, pickled eggs, all kinds of things that people can pickle. Curing, that's before canning was an option. Fruits could be preserved in honey or sugar, and it would make them last. Another thing that is cured is ham, is something you may know of that's cured. So that's just where they use salt for meat, and they just store it in a big, large vessel of salt. They used to do this back in the day, and it actually stores the meat, makes it last longer. Refining grains produces a longer lasting as a storable food product. Whole grains are more likely to spoil than refined grains. Refined grains means that you remove the bran, as it's done in rice or wheat, to produce a grain source that stores well for many years. Now, a lot of people are they're now saying, we're taking out the good stuff, taking out the bran, the good things in those processes. So, but that's how we get it to, you can keep rice in your pantry forever, and it's not going to go bad. So there's some give and take. Some modern methods of preservation. So freezing, freezing's really common. You may have a deep freezer or a stand-up extra freezer where you store meat. That's what we do. I've mentioned I raise cattle. We usually get a steer killed every year, and we put all of that meat in a deep freezer, and it lasts for the year, and that's what we eat. Um, so it's great for that. You're very familiar with freezer and frozen foods. A lot of commercially frozen food is blast frozen, so that's where they freeze it at a very low temperature very quickly. Home freezers freeze foods more slowly than commercial freezers, but they're still safe and effective. So, frozen food often tastes better and more nutritious than fresh foods out of season because you've kept the ingredient or the nutrition. Canning, okay, like a can of corn, it can be done in a glass jar if you do it homemade or like you buy at the grocery store. So, canning is relatively modern, seals food in an airtight container. They're mostly sold in metal jars, but glass jars are the same. The same technology. So the foods are sterilized at high heat to destroy the bacteria and microorganisms. And then typically we use a lot of salt to help preserve. So that may be a takeaway there, a bad takeaway. They're really convenient and a really popular choice. I don't see canned food ever going away. Says there is a decline, but I think there's always going to be a need there. Pasteurization, so that's destroying bacteria by heating foods. So milk is pasteurized. So milk's pasteurized at a low temperature. Others are at a high temperature. So like juices, a lot of drinks are done by pasteurization, which was developed by Louis Pasteur. He worked in wine and beer as a microbiologist, and he tried to improve the shelf life of wine. And he realized that the technology could be used on wine and other uses. So after World War II, it really took off, and all the milk became pasteurized. It reduces milk-borne diseases in babies and children. So this was a really great thing. It says there's been a lot of talk about raw milk and the greatness about that recently. People going back to that. Here are 5 myths that the CDC talks about drinking raw milk. So the nutritional benefits from drinking raw milk are the same as pasteurized. Using raw milk to make cheese or ice cream is just as dangerous as drinking raw milk. It's important to eat it that's pasteurized, so you're getting rid of that bacteria. Organic milk that hasn't been pasteurized isn't any safer than non-organic milk. Healthy animals carry germs that contaminate milk and can create very serious health issues for people. Very clean dairy farms also use illness-causing germs. A farm that's safer than another can't prevent the development of harmful germs. So those are some myths that they just busted. Another one's freeze drying. So a lot of fruits are done by freeze drying. It's not as common, but they have a long shelf life and they can be rehydrated. Irradiation is relatively uncommon. It uses radiation. Eliminates sprouting of potatoes or onions, destroys insects in flour and grains. So combinations of all of these are more likely to be used. You can process food at home. Most of it's done on the industrial scale, but you can do it on your own by freezing prepared meals to eat later, cleaning, chopping, and prepping, and then freezing, cooking and freezing, stock or broth, canning fruits and vegetables, making and canning jams, jellies, and fruit butter. So there's lots of different ways you can preserve food. Remember, not all preservation is bad. There is a need for it, and remember the main types.